podcast made by women for women. We are talking with a wide variety of experts, from a sex therapist to the CDC, to bring you the stories you will only hear here. Our goal is to entertain and educate, because it's more clear than ever just how much we as women are doing. As parents, spouses, employees, just as everything, don't miss out on being in the know. Subscribe to Soul Source wherever you listen to podcasts today, and leave us a review. This part is so important. It's the way that we can continue to bring you the content you love each and every week. So buckle up, Soul Source Society, because we're about to get started.
There's this term called the window of tolerance. And most of us navigate life inside this window. But all kinds of things can happen. Lack of sleep, poor nutrition, lack of exercise, time outdoors, lack of having a strong social connection, a place where you have psychological safety. All those things can affect your ability to tolerate life. And along comes a lemon, and here comes another, and there's a curveball, and now all of a sudden you might find yourself bumping up against this window of tolerance.
Hello, everyone. I am your host, Raquel Lamal, and you know the saying, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, our guest today can explain just how much is going on below the surface for so many people. My guest on today's show has been through a lot, and we're going to get into this a lot more with her, but just to give you an idea, she woke up and found her husband dead next to her one morning. She then was removed from the business that she co-ran with her husband, and she was forced to watch as so many of the people she cared about lost their jobs due to the pandemic. Then she was seriously injured, but through it all, instead of breaking her, she's found a way to turn all of those negative things and experiences into something positive. Jennifer Bartolotta of Milwaukee, Wisconsin is my guest today, and the topic we are discussing is something called trauma-informed care. Now, if you're like me, you're like, I don't know what the heck that means, right? So let me give you a quick definition. Trauma-informed care is all about looking past a situation or a person's actions to figure out why they are behaving the way that they are. Usually, it is because there's some form of trauma that has triggered that reaction, and the trauma can span back decades. Jennifer Bartolotta is here now to explain the whole concept much better than I ever could. Jennifer, welcome to Soul Source.
Thank you. Good morning. I am excited to be here with you this morning.
I'm excited to have you. You are such a bright, vibrant, happy personality. It's just fun to talk to you.
I feel the same. From another brother's uncle's mother's daughter, right?
Yeah. So how are you doing? How are you doing today? How's today look?
Today is great. I woke up, the sun is shining. I've kind of doubled down on healthy habits. And so I'm pretty disciplined about my routine to protect my health. And I engaged in all of that this morning. And now I'm beginning my workday with you. How much better could it get?
Oh, it doesn't get better than that. Soul Source is the best place to start. So I gave a very quick overview here of some of the battles that you faced in the last 2 years, but can you kind of, outline those a little more for us? Start at the top, if you will. You co-ran a restaurant business with your husband for a number of years. What was that business? Why was it so important to you?
So my husband started the Bartolotta restaurants almost probably 27 years ago now with his brother. And he was the co-founder. And about 4 years into that, I met Joe. We fell in love. I moved to Milwaukee, and we were together for the better part of 18 years. And I stood by his side as he continued to build, some people call a restaurant empire, but continued to build a business. We shared this common thing that we were never in it for the money. We were in it because serving people felt good to us, and it never, ever felt like work. And I think that his adherence to his 5 tenets, where his employees were first and the bottom line was last, much to the chagrin of his attorneys and accountants and bankers and everybody else. But I think that high EQ that he had and that he brought to his business created a space where employees felt like they mattered. And we weren't churning and burning them through a system, and we didn't care about them. I remember when the economy crashed in 2000, 2007, 2008, one of the things that we do for all of our employees is provide what we call family meal. And so every shift that you work for us, we provide you with a warm meal. So if you work a double, you're getting 2 meals a day. And the chef team, we had to cut costs. And so the chef team came back to Joe and said, well, one of the easiest things to cut off the top is family mail. It's expensive. And Joe said, find another way. And so it was his general approach to business that I think was really unique. You know, we live in a business world that's very transactional and not very transformational. And Joe transformed not just the city of Milwaukee and the restaurant scene, but people's lives. 2,300 people showed up to what we called the celebration of his life or his funeral. And I just don't think that you have that wide of a net without being walking the talk and really caring about humanity. And so it was important because it wasn't work. It was a really big family. It was a family of 1,000 employees.
And it's like, so that was his side of things. You were also doing quite a bit there with the company as well, right?
I was. When I first moved to Milwaukee, Joe wouldn't let me work for anybody else. And I said, well, what am I going to do? I don't want to work in a restaurant. And he said, you're smart, go find your way. So I did two things for the company primarily. I was in charge of developing a sales team. So it's very common in hospitality, more on the hotel side, that you have a sales force out there going up, trying to drum up business. Not so common in the restaurant industry. And we did what I knew. I came from Fortune 500 America and sales and then sales management. And I brought those experiences and those skills to Joe's company. And we had a team at one time of 4 people going out, knocking on doors and drumming up business for the company. And then in addition to that, I oversaw the company's philanthropy. Really, who ran it was our board. We put together a board of managers. In the restaurant business, you have the front of the house, people that you see serving you. And then we have the back of the house, people that are preparing your food and taking care of things like washing your dishes. So we had an equal number of managers from the front and the back of the house. And every year we would choose a nonprofit through a little bit of a vetting process to saddle up next to and leverage our brand and our resources to raise awareness, funds, and friends for them. And we chose exclusively, and that just because that's what spoke to them, but we exclusively ended up choosing Milwaukee-based nonprofits. So we wanted to move needles for people, and it's hard to move a needle for national organizations like the American Heart Association, but our little brand in Milwaukee could move a needle for Pathfinders or Running Rebels or Safe and Sound or some of the other nonprofits that we saddled up to over the years. And so we would literally hop into bed with them and create this beautiful partnership where we used our resources and our talents to culminate in a fundraising event for them. And it was just always so much fun and so rewarding.
So much giving back in what you guys did. That's just incredible. And this is going on for a number of years until one morning. And I want to go back to that morning. And this is where your story here with Trauma Informed Care starts. So first off, I mean, you told me, we talked a little bit before this, that you found your husband lying next to you unresponsive one morning. I can't imagine what that must have been like. So first off, deepest condolences for that. That had to be incredibly tough. But that was really the catalyst to everything that transpired here. Can you tell me a little bit, bring me back to that moment, and then what happened going forward that got you to this trauma-informed care that you do now?
Sure. It had been leading up to his death. It had been a week of hell. My mom fell and broke her leg. My dad was given accidentally a lethal overdose of narcotics and spent 3 days in the ICU.
Oh my
And Joe got
goodness.
the flu. And so I was managing my mom and my dad and Joe, and Joe fought the flu. He really started to not feel well on Friday, battled it over the weekend, and on Monday stayed home from work. I had my parents with me. They both had doctor's appointments in opposite ends of Milwaukee. So I've got 2 80-year-olds in wheelchairs that I'm schlepping around. My poor husband's at home sick, and you're just torn, right? You take care of what is most urgent. And so I had cleared my calendar for the rest of the week to be able to stay home and take care of Joe. So I got home Monday night, and he wasn't feeling well still. there was a Bucks game on. They were in the playoffs, and I made him dinner. He ate a little bit of it. I went to bed about 10 o'clock, and I said, buddy, he was a late guy.
Hmm.
I'm the morning girl. He was a late night owl. And I said, buddy, you know what? You're sick. Please don't stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning watching mindless shit. Come to bed. And he said, okay. So I don't know when he came to bed. I was exhausted. I went up, I fell right asleep. I have no idea what time he came to bed. And the next morning I woke up, and he was ice cold, and he had passed. And that's a really, I don't, that's a moment in time that will always have impact for me. I don't know that I'll ever be able to speak about that moment in time without it dredging up that moment in time, right?
Well, understandably so. Yeah.
So I am so blessed with the friends that I have and the family that I have. One of my brothers who lives in Milwaukee made it to my house in 15 minutes. I don't even know how he did it. My brother from Chicago was up in about an hour and a half. And my brother from Florida was there about 7 o'clock that night and stayed with me for a month. For a month, I did nothing. I didn't feed my dogs. I didn't do my dishes. I didn't shop. I didn't drive myself anywhere. I was enveloped by the love of my close friends and family, and they lifted me through that period. And so, when you're married to somebody like Joe, there's a lot of stuff that comes with that,
Hmm.
starting with his funeral. And I always knew that Joe belonged to everybody. He didn't belong to any one person. And there were so many people that were going to want to pay their respects.
Hmm.
And we literally ended up having most people refer to it as a funeral. We called it a celebration of life, but it was at the Riverside Theater in Milwaukee, and 2,300 people showed up.
That's insane. That's so many people.
It was insane. We had 9 speakers representing every facet of his life, from old friends to his daughters. His brother spoke on behalf of his siblings. My brother had donated a kidney to Joe, so my brother spoke, a couple of employees spoke, and I spoke last. And I knew that I was going to have a hard time getting up and doing it, even though I'm a public speaker. And I knew that if I saw 2,300 people out there, I would lose it completely. So I asked that there just be a pin drop light on me. So I couldn't see out. It was all blacked out. And it was a great day. And he would have wanted that. What he actually wanted, because we talked about it, Joe had juvenile diabetes. He'd had 3 heart attacks. He had 7 stents in his heart. And so we talked about, what he wanted his post-death thing to look like. And we, at the time, when the company still does, there's a venue we have called the Grain Exchange, and it's this beautiful old building that was at one point in time the busiest trading floor in the world, and all the grain got traded on that floor in downtown Milwaukee. And it's this gorgeous venue. So Joe had said to me, and his sister happens to run it, Joe said, I want to be lying in state with the red velvet stanchions with a gospel choir up in the balcony, and I want people to come kiss the ring for 3 days. And I'd say to him, I'm not doing that. It's your sister's venue. I'm not going to put her through that trauma. And so I did not do what he actually asked me to do.
We got pretty darn close.
We got close. Yeah, we got close. And so that sort of began a good 18 months of what felt like traumatic whack in the face after traumatic whack in the face.
So, and let's talk about that a little bit more, because things kind of spin from there. You ended up actually getting hurt while you were still mourning your husband and dealing with all of the other traumas that were coming here. So, talk with me about that. What happened there?
Sure. So Joe, I now call it Joe's Great Escape, because what a great time to get out of here. Joe made his great escape on April 23rd of 2019. And on February 26th of 2020, I had to execute paperwork that officially removed me from all basis and interest in the company in exchange for a note. And that did not come as a surprise to me. It was paperwork that I had signed about 10 years prior. And the company transferred to Joe's brother. But it's really weird to be part of something for almost 20 years and have it be everything that you live and breathe and do, and then have to walk away from it. And so, I still struggle with, well, what does that mean? And how do I answer questions when people say, well, why aren't you involved? And the reality is that I had almost 20 years with this incredible man. And I got to stand by his side as he built this incredible company. And the company lives on. It's just run by his brother. And I want and need to be in spaces where Joe and I would have been together. And as you can imagine, any two siblings are very different. And so it's my brother-in-law's company. And look, we're in the middle of COVID. And if anybody can get a company, a restaurant group out of the situation they find themselves in, it would be my brother-in-law. I think my husband, quite frankly, would be really hard pressed. I think he would have done it, no question, but I think it would have taken an emotional toll on him that would have made helping navigate the company through this challenging. So that happened in February, and then in March, COVID hits. And so I was just coming off the heels of the realization that, wow, I'm never going to be part of that again in any form. And I read online that my brother-in-law had closed the company and furloughed about 950 of the employees of the company. But, those people to me were like family. I mean, we've been through ups and downs and marriages and babies and parents dying and friends dying and employees dying. And if you can imagine what a family of 1,000 people looks like, you can imagine the ups and downs there. And we were with all of those people during those times. And so when they got furloughed, it was very traumatic for me. And not only was it traumatic for me, but my ego got in the way. And I took great offense to the fact that my brother-in-law, in the midst of having to make the gut-wrenching decision to close the company and furlough all these employees, had disrespected me, and I put air quotes around that, by not reaching out to me even with a text and letting me know that it had happened. And so on top of the trauma that I felt for these poor employees, I let my ego get between me and the reality of my brother-in-law's situation. And I created this literally hurricane-like storm that was ravaging my emotions and my ability to control them. And then that led 12 hours later. So I found out about that about 8 o'clock at night. Wasn't able to sleep, woke up from a very restful night of whatever little sleep I got, and was still pretty charged up. And so I said to myself, well, it was, I don't know, March 20th ish. And I said, I'm going to go out and start getting my garden ready for seeding. And I thought it would be a good idea to do that. Well, I had hurt my back several years before, and I know to wear a back brace when I go gardening. And I was so unregulated and outside of my body with my emotions that I didn't grab my back brace. And about 15 minutes into it, I bent over to pull up a stalk, and a white light flashed in front of my eyes, and I felt this searing pain. And I knew that I had done some pretty significant damage to my back, at least my nerves. And that is still a daily reminder to me of what happens when we lack awareness and the ability to regulate ourselves. And so that's that story.
Yeah. Well, and so when did you know? Because like catalysts, right? Everything catalysts and snowballs to this point where you get really severely hurt. And so when did you know? Was that the moment, or was there something before where it was like, I'm not handling all of this well? When did you have that
It
realization?
was that moment. In the middle of that pain, I thought, holy crap, you talk about self-sabotaging and self-harming. There's this beautiful Buddhist principle that I try really hard to live by, and I'm by no means perfect, but the Buddhist principle is first do no harm. And what that means is first do no harm to yourself. And if you're not doing any harm to yourself, it's really hard to hurt other people, even without intent, right? And so I had literally hurt myself. I had my inability to have awareness around my triggers, my inability to have better resolve some of the trauma that I was carrying or coming off of recently. And then my inability to regulate myself led to something that I might suffer the rest of my life. My foot might be numb until the day I die. And so it's a really poignant reminder of why it's important to have better awareness about yourself.
So you take that moment and then you learn about something called trauma-informed care. First off, define that for us. What is trauma-informed care?
I will give you my definition and not the science. You did a great job with the introduction of it, but trauma-informed care for me sits on the premise that uh, life is really messy and we can be really fragile. And when I see behavior that's confusing, incongruent, or outlying, I know because of my training in trauma informed care and understanding trauma and triggers and what happens when we're not regulated, that behavior, it has its roots somewhere else. It's not rooted in what you're seeing. And so the beauty of it is when you see it in yourself and you understand what's happening to yourself, it's almost impossible not to offer that same compassion and love for other people when you see it in them. Because I know that it comes from a place that isn't about this moment in time, it's somewhere deeper. And having my own trauma and having my own triggers that I now understand, it automatically, for me, just opens your heart to say, hey, what's going on?
Mhm.
Or to give space, right?
So what type of an experience is trauma? Like what would trauma be?
Sure. So there's adversity,
Mhm.
which we all bump up against with regularity. And then there's trauma. Trauma is more of a sustained state that affects your ability to function, where adversity, it can happen and we're able to take it, receive it, and keep moving with it. Trauma is when something traumatic happens or even adversity happens, and that stays with you in a sustained way, and it affects your ability to function in a way that's expected.
Okay. So what is the importance then in your opinion? We touched on it a little bit, but in understanding the concept of this trauma-informed approach.
It's important to understand it because life is messy and people are fragile. And the world was suffering from a significant amount of disengagement and social isolation prior to COVID. And
Mhm.
COVID has exacerbated that, and it separated us more. And so if you look at any studies about where people are in terms of their mental and emotional stability right now and their health, there are an awful lot of people out there that are suffering, and that's the self-admitted group. When we work in mental health, there's an awful lot of pain and mental health challenges that go unreported because of the stigma that's attached to it. And that's evidenced recently by the Indianapolis Colts, who I give a huge amount of credit to and a standing ovation to for coming out with a campaign about the stigma of mental health. And their whole thing is it's okay not to be okay. It's important because if we don't recognize what it is, then what happens is our judgy brain takes over and we
Mhm.
begin to assign behaviors, we begin to assign traits to behaviors. So if you would have seen me dysregulated in that moment, you could have thought I was aggressive, that I was angry, all the negative words that we assign to women who are aggressive, right? Which I won't go into. My behavior for sure was outlying. It for sure was confusing to the people around me because I'm normally a very regulated person. And so what happens in environments, it destroys trust when we're not regulated and we can't talk about it. So if this morning, as an example, I came into the Zoom and my hair was a mess and it looked like I hadn't showered and it looked like I'd been up all night,
Mhm.
that would have been very confusing to you.
Mhm.
It's
This is
not what
true.
you would have expected from me, right?
Right, you wouldn't expect it and you would start making assumptions. about what's going on with that person, why they appeared that way.
And whether or not you were going to change your questions. And then I create a whole narrative in your brain. My unregulated behavior is going to create a whole narrative in your brain and cause there to be confusion. And when there's confusion, there's tension. And so when we're not regulated and we don't understand why people are behaving the way that they are, the only thing that's going to happen is negative judgment without understanding the trauma part of it. So if you have this foundation and basis to understand trauma-informed care and you see this behavior that's confusing, outlying, or incongruent, all of a sudden now you, instead of saying, well, that person's angry or that person, whatever, right? Or a boss, worse, a boss walks in unregulated and is showing confusing behavior. We've all been in those circumstances where we've reported to somebody who's having a bad day. Well, it's not cool to talk about having a bad day. And if you're a leader, it really is not cool, because we've been taught that we're always supposed to be up and we're not ever supposed to fail and we're not ever supposed to have a bad day and we're supposed to be perfect. That does everybody a huge disservice because it confuses them. So if a boss walks in not in a good mood, the entire employee team could think that maybe they're about to get furloughed.
And we have a dog in the background barking because we're all doing this from home.
And they're downstairs, so I apologize. So then the employees start to lack trust in the leader because the leader is doing and saying things that are very confusing. And so when we understand the basis for why we behave in the way that we do, it can help create trust and build trust and restore trust in relationships, because we understand then that there's a source for this behavior that's confusing us.
So if you could talk about you personally here, how did you understand, like, how did understanding this approach impact the way that you reacted to the trauma that you endured? Does that make sense?
Understanding trauma-informed care has helped me to do a couple of things. It's helped me to see that moment in time when I hurt myself through a completely different lens. It helped me to understand besides the physical harm I did to myself, that's more outwardly, the internal harm I did physiologically to my body by being dysregulated. It helped me to see the actual thing through a completely different lens. Now that I understand what my trigger is, I understand what happened to me in that moment. And now physiologically, when I feel myself having this sense that I'm becoming unregulated, I know where it comes from and I know how to regulate it. All things I didn't know before. Most importantly, it helped me check my ego. Our brain is an incredibly powerful thing that when we don't learn to harness it, can yank us around. And that's exactly what happened to me in that moment. My ego yanked me around and I got my shorts in a knot because my ego felt disrespected that my poor brother-in-law hadn't reached out to me. So in retrospect, once I got over my ego, here's a guy who was thrown into an impossible set of shoes to walk in. Nobody would have wanted to have to step into Joe's shoes, especially given what had happened. At the time he was pursuing opening his own restaurant in Chicago, he had to put all of what his dreams were on hold to completely disrupt his life and move to Milwaukee. And then less than a year later, make the painful decision, because through no fault of his own, that he had to furlough 950 employees. And I was upset because he didn't take time to reach out to me directly. His to-do list that day had to have been a million things long, and rightfully so. The last thing on it, or not even on it, was me. But the ego is it can be a good thing, but it also can be a really, really bad influence. And in that moment in time, it was. And through learning trauma-informed care and having a better understanding of myself, that's probably the greatest lesson that came out of it, is to check yourself a lot.
So if someone is listening, and that you now know how to recognize when this is bubbling up in you, what do you want someone who may be dealing with trauma of their own right now, and if they're hearing this, what do you want them to understand?
Um, First of all, trauma is a really real thing. And when you're unpacking it and you're working with it, it's important to be in environments that feel safe for you. And there may be people who have listened this far and had to tap out. Trauma is tricky. And I think that it's better to find safe spaces to unpack it than to hold it in, because holding it in and not um, working with it, not understanding it, not understanding then yourself, what triggers you. When we get triggered, it can bring up trauma. And so learning how to be aware of when you feel like you're becoming unregulated. So there's this term called the window of tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us navigate life inside this window, but all kinds of things can happen: lack of sleep, poor nutrition, lack of exercise, time outdoors, lack of having a strong social connection, a place where you have psychological safety. All those things can affect your ability to tolerate life. And along comes a lemon, and here comes another, and there's a curveball, and now all of a sudden you might find yourself bumping up this against this window of tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
And then one more thing happens. That thing happens like me, where I got triggered. Now all of a sudden you're outside this window of tolerance, and one of two things is happening. We behave in either a hyper way, we become aggressive, or a hypo way, where we retreat. And if we can just understand that framework, then when we sort of feel it coming, we can have basis to understand, oh, that's happening to me. One thing that I would want to share with anybody who's dealing with trauma is something that I learned from a book um, by a neuroscientist. She studied the physiological effects of triggers on your body.
Okay.
And from a scientific perspective, she was able to prove that the physiologically, a trigger only lasts for 90 seconds. So anything beyond 90 seconds is that ego, that brain creating a narrative, and it's attaching itself to that physiological 90-second surge.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did is I took a necklace that Joe had given me and I repurposed it, and I wear it close to my heart. And when I feel myself getting triggered, I touch my necklace like the center of a storm, and I say, Jen, all you have to do is breathe for 90 seconds. You're going to get through this. You're going to be fine. Just give it the 90 seconds, let your body go through what it goes through physiologically, and you'll calm down. And it's so helpful for me. And the most interesting thing happens when I keep telling my brain to calm down, then it can't create a story. And the 90 seconds comes and the 90 seconds goes, and I am still regulated. And it's one of the most powerful tools that I have deployed in my own life in the last 2 years.
That is so smart. It's so important to take a breath, and it's so easy not to do it. Yeah, you get tense, you get pissed off, frankly, and you just react. So, you actually teach trauma informed care to businesses, and you do this in a pretty cool way. It's a stoplight approach. Tell me a little bit about that.
So basically, we go through training, and I use anecdotal stories to understand what dysregulation looks like, to offer tools for regulation. And then, as I mentioned earlier, one of the most beautiful things about this training is once you start to identify it in yourself, it's impossible not to see it in others. And so leaders, I don't know, that some people go back and say it happened in the early 90s ish, whatever. It leadership has become very transactional.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders are tasked with all kinds of things, and leadership has become very transactional. Well, all of a sudden we hit a bump in the road with our employees, and that first started with COVID. then racial reckoning, and then everything else that happened last year, from natural disasters to the election to the uncertainty about the results of the election. And all of that just created this storm for people that they're having a difficult time navigating.
Mhm.
So what this system does is it allows you to see a little glimpse into the mental and emotional health of your employees, and affords them a space where they feel seen, heard, and like they mattered. And so the way that it works is we use stoplight colors literally. Green means I'm inside my window of tolerance. I'm good. I'm not bumping up against it. I'm ready to go. Yellow is, all right, life's a little prickly for me today. I'm here. I think I got this. I think I'm going to be okay, but I'm a little prickly today. Red is, I'm really bumping up against my window. I might even be outside of it. And so the way that this plays out then is at the beginning of the day, the leader very transparently logs in their color. So if they're in a bad mood or they're prickly or they're bumping up against their window, they say that color, and then everybody on the team responds back with the color that they are. So now we all know where we are. So if somebody's red, give them space, right? So let's say you're the leader and an email comes out from your boss that says there's a policy change that has to happen before the end of the week. And let's pretend it's Wednesday. So the leader looks at the board and says, oh, my board is more yellow red than it is yellow green. We all know that change is disruptive. I'm going to hope that tomorrow looks better, and I'm not going to announce a policy change today. Let's say it was timely and it had to go out today, and you look at that board and it's more yellow red than it is yellow green. An email to a team of people who's stressed is probably not the best way to communicate that change. And so it might disrupt your life a little bit, but maybe you're going to have to make some phone calls. Maybe you're going to have to handle people in a little bit different way if you have the capacity to do that. Let's say there's nothing that needs to go out and you notice that Jennifer's logged in 3 days in a row as red. Maybe as the leader, then at the end of day 3, you go to Jennifer and say, hey, I see that you've had a challenging week. I appreciate that you showed up anyway. And if there's anything that I can do to support you or take something off your plate for you, know that I'm here. And so it allows leaders to meet the employees where they are right now, as opposed to leading by just checking things off their list.
And what is the difference that makes? Because I gotta assume that's an entirely different work environment than what a traditional work environment is. If you're checking in and you're being cognizant of employees' mental states every day.
Well, first of all, it makes every employee feel like they're seen and heard, right? Because I'm telling you, I'm challenged today. It affords the leader some transformation in their leadership style, because as opposed to showing up every day and feeling like they're smoke and mirrors when they're having a bad day, they get to be transparent about the fact that they too have days that challenge them, and then they give their team the opportunity to lift them. I think one of the things that Joe did beautifully was he allowed his team to lift us. Um, there was the first heart attack Joe had. He spent 11 days in the ICU, and it was at the busiest time of our year. And we never took on partners. And so it was just not something we wanted people to know about at that point in time. And so his leadership team literally stepped in and held us and the confidential nature of what we were struggling with, while going about business as if everything was normal, and just saying that Joe was busy over here, Joe was busy over there. One heart attack, he missed our company picnic. We were in the ICU at St. Luke's and couldn't go to the company picnic. And employees knew how much he loved it. And so his poor leadership team had to lift us and hold us. And so I think that when you are transparent about your life and where you are, it affords people the permission to know that it's okay not to be okay, and that you're going to be okay, and you're in an environment that appreciates the fact that you did the best that you could today.
Appreciates that you're human, right? We're not robots.
We're not robots. And I think in this transactional way that the business world works today, what's been lost is our humanity. What's been lost is, behind those eyeballs is a person who carries their weight. I liken us to, in my session, an iceberg. We have this tremendous capacity as human beings to put on a facade and be able to go out into public and mostly hold ourselves together.
Yeah.
And bouncing beneath our surface can be all kinds of stuff, all kinds of stuff. You don't know if the person you're talking to is a recovering alcoholic. I mean, we just don't know. What we do know is that life is messy, and this human condition, this journey that we're on at different points in our life for all kinds of different reasons can create an environment where we're very fragile. And it doesn't mean we're going to break. It doesn't mean we're going to fall apart. It doesn't mean if I log in that I'm red on a day that I can't handle it. It's just, I'm letting you know that I'm challenged today.
It could be like a little short-tempered or just a little something.
Yeah, I might snap. You might catch me wandering off with my eyes when normally I'm really attentive. There's a thing in psychology called perception management. Are you familiar?
Vaguely, but tell everybody here so that we all know.
So perception management is how we are perceived by other people. And in the 1970s, there was a psychologist in California who was studying this, and he purports, and most psychologists believe today still, that 93% of how we communicate is non-verbally, and that's how we're perceived. So you started with don't judge a book by its cover, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is that when we do stuff with our bodies that's confusing, it's only going to create that negative narrative in the perceiver's eyes.
It makes complete sense. Now, anybody who's listening to this, the one critique that I can think of that someone might think is, okay, you have leaders who are supposed to be giving out stoplight approach and the employees are supposed to do it, but how honest are people really? Like, will people really tell you how they're really feeling, or are they going to go, oh, maybe I'm a red, but I'm actually going to say I'm a yellow because it doesn't look good if I say I'm a red? So how does the system work, and how do you know that that's not happening?
So first of all, it's not for everybody, right? It's just not. It takes a leadership team that with pretty high EQ to begin with to want to create a space where employees have what's called psychological safety. And Google did a huge study about this. One of the number one things that employees want today from their workplace is psychological safety. I want to know that I'm going to be safe psychologically in this space. And so if the leadership team has high EQ anyway, the way that this gets deployed is that the training is done first with the leadership team. Then they take about 10 days to allow that to sink in. And then we regroup about 10 days to 2 weeks later and talk about how we want to deploy it in a way that's culturally congruent, because every company's culture is different and it needs to feel like it's part of the culture of the company in how it gets deployed. And so once the leadership team agrees on what feels right for them, maybe they don't want to use stoplight colors, maybe they want to use words, maybe they want to use numbers, right? The mechanism itself doesn't matter. And then they go one level down and we train that next level down. And then that system goes in place as a pilot and we keep tweaking it until they're ready to say, okay, now let's give it to the masses. So we don't even go down to that level unless we know that it's working and the leadership team is willing to lead with this level of transparency. I do have a couple of potential clients I'm working with right now where we're going to pilot it in HR related departments and see how they feel about it. And maybe it'll get moved into certain departments within an organization as opposed to the whole organization. But anybody who is part of this benefits from this give and take with here's where I am and I'm good today, or here's where I am and I need some space today.
It makes total sense, top down, and it has to work from the top down. So you have a website. It is called bartolottaassociates.com. On this website, there's a really cool quote, and I feel like it sums up everything you do. So I want to talk about that a little bit from Maya Angelou. It's right on the top, and it says, quote, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." What is it about that quote that you like, and how does that drive your business model?
It actually drives everything about me. We've all felt marginalized. We've all felt like we didn't matter, or we weren't seen, or we weren't heard. And that's what that quote means to me. That quote means to me that behind every set of eyeballs is a person. And that person carries all of the experiences of their life with them on a daily basis. And my job, I believe, is to somehow leave every person that I encounter better for having crossed my path. And I mean everybody. I talk to, I try to make the person who's taking my money at the parking booth laugh. I make the garbage guys laugh. I try to bring light and levity and love wherever I go. And I think that so many people, I know that it matters because of the response I get from, it's unscientific, but 85% of the people, they first seem shocked that somebody's talking to them. And then you can just tell by their smile and their body language for that moment in time that you brought something to them that was different and made their world just a little bit better or a little bit brighter. And if we all lived by this idea that we have the power of one is powerful, right? If we all live by this idea that not everybody you come encounter with in a day, because maybe that's a lot for you, but maybe you said, I'm going to find one person I don't know today, and I'm going to figure out how to make them smile. I mean, consider the ripple effect of that, right? And so I believe that love finds a way. I do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why I'm doing some of the work with Braver Angels. I believe that when we can take what separates us, which is time and distance, even people who are really in disagreement about certain things, anything, pick a big topic that we disagree about these days. You bring people together and you see the humanity in that human being. You have possibility for something magical to happen. And if people feel discounted or like they're not seen or they're not heard or worse, then magic's never going to happen in that interaction.
And that interaction, I mean, it's something I've personally felt this myself, and then and I know other people who have too, where it's like if you're having a bad day and somebody just makes you laugh just a little bit, or they just you cling to that. You kind of cling to that for the whole day. Like that was the one good thing that happened to you that day. So it can really make a difference.
Yeah. And it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take money. It doesn't take that much time. You can make somebody smile in 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if someone is looking to book a session with you, they want to learn more about trauma-informed care and what you teach at their business or even just personally, how can they get a hold of you?
Email is best, jenniferbartolotta@gmail.com. I am on Instagram and LinkedIn as my full name as well.
Okay, so we will have those links in the show notes here of this podcast. And Jennifer, you were just, like you said, you like to spread love and light, and you were just a joy to talk to. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I have enjoyed my time and you. And one day we'll come together for a big hug.
Thank you for listening. And if you want to hear more Soul Source, subscribe to our show. We are available wherever you listen to podcasts. If there's something you want us to talk about on the show, we can do that too. We have a Facebook group. It's called the Soul Source Society, and it's where we interact with listeners, share special content only seen in that group, talk about shows, get ideas for future podcasts, and overall, we just have a lot of fun. That's Soul Source Society on Facebook. We hope to see you there. Soul Source is brought to you by Red Shoes Inc. It's a leading agency specializing in crisis and strategic communications, media relations, social media, and so much more. To learn more about Soul Source and Red Shoes, visit us at redshoesinc.com.